Standing in my Beverly Hills penthouse gazing down at the glittering city lights below, I never imagined that the woman who gave me life would become the architect of my greatest heartbreak. For 24 years, I trusted her completely, believed family meant unconditional love and support. But sometimes the people closest to you can become your greatest betrayers. What my mother did to me was unforgivable, yet it led to something I never saw coming. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and please hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next will shock you. Trust me, you will want to hear every single detail of how my own mother destroyed my life, but how I turned it into my greatest victory. My name is Genevieve, and 3 years ago, life felt perfect in Portland, Oregon. At 24, I was working as a graphic designer for a boutique marketing firm, creating visual stories that brought brands to life. Every morning, I would wake up in my cozy apartment knowing that Marcus Thompson, the love of my life, was just a phone call away. Marcus was 28, a brilliant software engineer with kind eyes, and the most infectious laugh I had ever heard. We had been together for 3 beautiful years, and our conversations about marriage had become more frequent and exciting. Our relationship was the kind that made other people jealous. Marcus would surprise me with handwritten notes tucked into my laptop bag, and I would leave little sketches on his bathroom mirror. We spent weekends exploring Portland's food scene, hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, and dreaming about our future home with a garden where we could grow tomatoes and herbs. He had even shown me pictures of engagement rings, asking casually which styles I preferred. Life felt like a romantic movie, and I was the starring actress in my own fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its complications, and mine came in the form of my family dynamics. After my father passed away when I was 16, our household had become a trio of strong-willed women. My mother, Dorothy, was 52 and had never remarried. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had opinions about everything, especially about what was best for her daughters. My older sister, Samantha, was 26, undeniably gorgeous, with striking features that turned heads wherever she went. She was also what people politely called free-spirited, which really meant she changed jobs every 6 months and had a history of dramatic relationships that ended in spectacular fashion. The dynamic between Samantha and me had always been complicated. While I was steady, reliable, and focused on building something lasting, Samantha was spontaneous, charming, and seemed to glide through life expecting things to fall into her lap. Our mother had always been more protective of Samantha, justifying it by saying that Samantha needed more guidance because she was too trusting and vulnerable. I had accepted this reality long ago, focusing on my own path rather than competing for attention. However, something began to shift in our family dynamic around the 6-month mark before everything fell apart. My mother started inviting Marcus over for dinner more frequently, especially on nights when I had to work late or attend client meetings. At first, I thought it was sweet that she wanted to bond with my boyfriend. Dorothy would cook his favorite meals and engage him in long conversations about his work, his goals, and his thoughts on various topics. Marcus seemed to enjoy these interactions, often telling me how much he appreciated having a mother figure in his life again, since his own parents lived across the country. But gradually, I noticed changes in Marcus that made me uncomfortable. Our conversations about the future became shorter and less enthusiastic. When I brought up wedding planning or talked about apartments we might rent together, he would nod absently and change the subject. His text messages became more formal, lacking the playful emoji-filled exchanges we used to share. When we were together, he seemed distracted, checking his phone more often and appearing lost in thought. The most troubling change was in our physical intimacy. Marcus had always been affectionate, reaching for my hand during movies, pulling me close during our evening walks, stealing kisses when we cooked together. But suddenly, those spontaneous moments of connection became rare. He would sit on the opposite end of the couch during our Netflix sessions, and our goodnight kisses began feeling perfunctory rather than passionate. Meanwhile, my sister Samantha had developed an unusual interest in Marcus's career and hobbies. She would ask detailed questions about his software projects during family dinners, something she had never done before. Samantha, who had always been indifferent to technology, suddenly wanted to understand programming languages and startup culture. She began joining our group activities, more often appearing at restaurants where she knew we would be having date nights, claiming it was just a coincidence. The most unsettling development was the private conversations I kept walking in on. I would enter the living room to find Marcus and my mother huddled together, their voices dropping to whispers when they noticed me. When I asked what they were discussing, Dorothy would smile and say they were just talking about current events or Marcus's work challenges. Marcus would nod in agreement, but his eyes would not quite meet mine. The truth began unraveling on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. I had left work early claiming I had a headache, but really I just wanted to surprise Marcus with his favorite Chinese takeout and a movie night. As I approached my mother's house to pick up some mail I had been having delivered there temporarily, I heard voices coming from the kitchen window. The familiar sound of Marcus's laugh made me smile, but something in the tone of the conversation made me pause before knocking. What I heard next changed everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. "Marcus, you have to understand that Samantha is the right choice for you." My mother's voice carried clearly through the slightly open window. "She is stronger, more successful, and can give you the stability that Genevieve never could. My youngest daughter is sweet, but she is too soft for what you need in life." My blood turned to ice as I heard Marcus respond. "Maybe you are right, Mrs. Williams. I have been thinking about what you said last week. Genevieve is... She is too gentle, too idealistic. In this competitive world, I need someone who can push me to be better, someone who understands ambition." I pressed myself against the side of the house, my heart hammering so loudly I was afraid they might hear it. My mother continued, "Samantha has always been my stronger daughter. She knows how to get what she wants, how to support a man's career without being clingy or needy. And honestly, Marcus, I think you two have much more in common than you and Genevieve ever did." "I have noticed that," Marcus replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "When Samantha and I talk, it feels effortless. She challenges me intellectually in ways that are different from Genevieve. And she is incredibly beautiful." "She is," my mother agreed warmly. "And she has expressed interest in you, Marcus. She thinks you are exactly the kind of man she has been looking for. Someone stable, intelligent, with real potential for success." The conversation continued, but I could barely process the words through the rushing sound in my ears. They were discussing me like I was some sort of failed investment, analyzing my shortcomings, and concluding that my sister would be a better match for the man I loved. The casual way they dissected my personality, my dreams, my worthiness felt like being flayed alive. I learned that this was not a spontaneous conversation. My mother had been orchestrating meetings between Marcus and Samantha for weeks. She had invited Samantha to join them for their private dinners, encouraged Marcus to seek Samantha's advice on career decisions, and systematically pointed out every way that Samantha was superior to me. She had told Marcus that I was too dependent, too emotional, and lacked the drive necessary to be a true partner to an ambitious man. Even worse, I discovered that Samantha had been an eager participant in this deception. She had been flirting with Marcus, sharing intimate conversations about their goals and dreams, and positioning herself as the woman who truly understood him. The coincidental appearances at our favorite restaurants had been carefully planned encounters designed to create opportunities for bonding. When I finally found the courage to confront them, the scene was even more devastating than I had imagined. I walked into my mother's living room where Marcus was sitting beside Samantha on the couch, their heads bent close together over his laptop, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. My mother was in her favorite armchair watching them with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was working perfectly. "Well, this is cozy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. All three of them looked up with guilty expressions that confirmed my worst fears. Marcus immediately moved away from Samantha, but the damage was already visible in their body language in the way they had been completely comfortable in each other's space. "Genevieve, sweetheart." My mother began using the same tone she had used when I was 5, and she was about to explain why I could not have ice cream for dinner. "Do not," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "I heard everything. I heard you discussing my inadequacies like I was some sort of defective product you needed to return." Marcus finally looked at me, and I saw no shame in his eyes, only resignation. "Jen, your mother helped me realize some things about what I really need in a relationship. I am sorry, but I think she is right about us not being compatible long term." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. This was the man who had whispered that he wanted to grow old with me, who had mapped out our future children's names, who had promised that we were soulmates destined to be together forever. My mother stood up and walked toward me with the confidence of someone who believed she was doing the right thing. "Genevieve, I did this because I love you. You and Marcus, you are too similar. You would enable each other's complacency. Samantha will challenge him, push him to reach his potential. And you, darling, you need someone who appreciates your gentle nature, not someone who needs a strong woman by his side." "You had no right," I whispered, tears finally beginning to flow. "You had no right to make this decision for me." Samantha finally spoke her voice, carrying that familiar tone of patient explanation she had used throughout our childhood when she was about to justify taking something that belonged to me. "Genevieve, Marcus and I have connected on a level that surprised both of us. We did not plan for this to happen, but when you find real compatibility, real intellectual and emotional synchronicity, you have to honor it." The words that came out of her mouth sounded like they belonged in a romance novel, not in the destruction of my life. She was reframing their betrayal as some sort of destined love story, casting herself and Marcus as star-crossed lovers who had found each other despite impossible odds. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that I recognized immediately. It was the engagement ring he had bought for me, the one I had glimpsed in his dresser drawer 2 weeks earlier when I was looking for a phone charger. He set it on the coffee table between us like he was returning a library book. "I am sorry, Jen," he said quietly. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but your mother helped me see that I was settling for comfortable instead of seeking extraordinary." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 3 years' worth of memories, trying to understand how my life had been dismantled so completely by the people who were supposed to love me most. Photos of Marcus and me smiled back at me from every surface, mocking reminders of a happiness that had apparently been built on quicksand. I found myself analyzing every moment of our relationship, wondering what signs I had missed, what inadequacies had been so obvious to everyone except me. The worst part was not just losing Marcus, though that pain felt like someone had reached into my chest and torn out essential organs. The worst part was realizing that my own mother and sister had viewed me as expendable, as someone whose feelings were less important than their grand plan for what they believed was best for everyone involved. Over the following days, I learned more details about their systematic campaign against my relationship. My mother had been telling Marcus stories about my childhood that emphasized my sensitivity and my tendency to avoid confrontation. She had shared my old diary entries with him, painting me as someone who lived in a fantasy world rather than engaging with reality. She had even enlisted our extended family in the effort, having my aunt casually mention to Marcus at a recent barbecue how Samantha had always been the go-getter of the family. Samantha, meanwhile, had been conducting what could only be described as a seduction campaign. She had researched Marcus's interests and learned enough about software development to engage him in technical conversations that made her seem intellectually compatible. She had started working out at his gym, timing her visits to coincide with his creating opportunities for post-workout coffee dates that she framed as friendly support during my busy periods at work. The betrayal felt like discovering that my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. Every family dinner where my mother had praised my artistic talents while subtly highlighting Samantha's business acumen had been part of a larger narrative designed to position my sister as the more desirable partner for any ambitious man. Every time Samantha had borrowed my clothes or copied my hairstyle, she had been conducting research for her eventual takeover of my life. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Marcus and Samantha announced their engagement with a Facebook post that made me physically sick. The photo showed them hiking in the same location where Marcus had first told me he loved me, wearing matching outdoor gear and beaming at the camera with the confidence of people who believed they had found their destiny. The comments from friends and family members who did not know the true story were full of congratulations and expressions of surprise about how quickly they had fallen in love. My mother called me that evening, her voice bright with excitement about wedding plans, and how happy she was that everything had worked out for the best. She seemed genuinely confused by my continued anger, explaining repeatedly that she had been thinking about my long-term happiness when she orchestrated the breakup. According to her logic, I would eventually thank her for saving me from a relationship that was not truly fulfilling my potential. That night, I made the decision that would change my life forever. I could not stay in Portland watching my sister live the life that had been stolen from me, attending family gatherings where everyone pretended that what had happened was natural and right. I needed to build something entirely new somewhere far enough away that I would not accidentally run into them at the grocery store or hear updates about their perfect life through mutual friends. I had saved about $3,000, enough to start over if I was careful and determined. Los Angeles had always seemed like a city where people went to reinvent themselves, where the entertainment industry's constant demand for creative content might provide opportunities for a graphic designer willing to work hard and take risks. 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into my Honda Civic and drove south toward a future I could not yet imagine. In my rearview mirror, Portland disappeared behind a wall of mountains and clouds, taking with it every assumption I had ever made about love, family, and my place in the world. Los Angeles hit me like a bright, chaotic wave of possibility and terror. My first apartment was a studio in Hollywood that was smaller than my walk-in closet back home, with thin walls that allowed me to hear every argument, celebration, and late-night conversation from my neighbors. The building smelled like disinfectant and dreams deferred, but the rent was within my budget, and it had a large window facing west that filled the space with golden light during sunset. Those first few months were the hardest of my life. I had left behind not just Marcus and my family, but also my job, my friend group, and every safety net I had ever known. Some nights I would lie awake listening to sirens and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The loneliness felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making even simple tasks like grocery shopping feel overwhelming. But I was determined not to crawl back to Portland with my tail between my legs, giving my mother the satisfaction of being right about my inability to handle independence. I started freelancing, taking any graphic design project I could find, no matter how small or poorly paid. I designed logos for food trucks, created flyers for community events, and spent countless hours in coffee shops with my laptop building a portfolio that would prove I could make it on my own terms. 6 months after arriving in Los Angeles, I received news through a mutual friend that Marcus and Samantha had gotten married in a beautiful ceremony at the Portland Rose Garden. The photos showed my sister in the dress she had always dreamed of wearing, surrounded by the family and friends who had celebrated the match, as if it had been inevitable all along. Marcus looked happy in a way that made me question everything I thought I had known about our relationship. That night, instead of crying, I made a list of everything I wanted to achieve in my new life. I would build a design business that would make me financially independent. I would create work that mattered, that told stories and helped brands connect with their audiences in meaningful ways. And I would prove to myself that my worth was not determined by who loved me, but by what I could accomplish when I stopped waiting for other people's approval. The breakthrough came 8 months later at a Starbucks in Beverly Hills. I was working on a logo design for a local bakery when a man at the next table began a phone conversation loud enough for the entire coffee shop to hear. He was frustrated because his marketing team had created what he called the most generic, soulless brand identity imaginable for a new sustainable energy company he was launching. During a break in his conversation, I found myself leaning over and saying, "Excuse me, I could not help overhearing. I am a graphic designer, and I think I understand the problem you are describing." The man looked up from his phone, and I was struck by his presence immediately. He was about 35 with dark hair that was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and the kind of confident posture that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His suit probably cost more than I made in a month, but his smile was warm and genuinely interested when he gestured for me to continue. Most corporate design firms create brands that look exactly like everything else in the market. I explained, pulling out my portfolio. They are afraid to take risks because they want to appeal to the broadest possible audience. But sustainable energy is not about playing it safe. It is about innovation, about changing how we think about our relationship with the planet. His name was Alexander Sterling, and he was the CEO of Sterling Industries, a company that developed and manufactured renewable energy solutions for commercial and residential applications. Over the course of our 2-hour conversation, I learned that he had built his business from a small startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise through a combination of technical innovation and strategic partnerships. More importantly, I discovered that Alexander understood the power of visual storytelling in a way that surprised me. He talked about brand identity as if it were a living language capable of communicating complex values and emotions in ways that words alone could never achieve. When I showed him my portfolio, he did not just look at the pretty pictures. He asked questions about my design process, about how I researched target audiences, about the relationship between aesthetic choices and business objectives. 3 days later, he hired me to redesign the complete brand identity for Sterling Clean Energy, his new subsidiary focused on residential solar installations. The project fee was more money than I had made in the previous 6 months combined. But more importantly, it was the kind of creative challenge that made me remember why I had fallen in love with design in the first place. Working with Alexander was unlike any professional relationship I had ever experienced. He treated me as an equal partner in the creative process, valuing my insights and pushing me to develop ideas I would never have attempted on my own. Our meetings extended into working dinners where we would sketch concepts on napkins and debate the psychological impact of different color palettes. Alexander had been married before, but his divorce had been finalized 2 years earlier. His ex-wife, he explained, had not understood his passion for his work, viewing his business as a competitor for his attention rather than an expression of his values. The marriage had ended amicably, but it had taught him the importance of finding someone who shared his drive and vision for the future. As our professional relationship evolved into friendship and then into something deeper, I found myself experiencing a kind of partnership I had never imagined possible. Alexander did not just appreciate my creative talents. He challenged me to think bigger about what I could accomplish. When I mentioned my dream of opening my own design studio, he did not patronize me with encouragement about how nice that sounded. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started researching commercial real estate options. 18 months after that first conversation in Starbucks, Alexander and I were married in a ceremony that was featured in Los Angeles Magazine and Architectural Digest. The wedding took place at his Malibu estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean, with a guest list that included business leaders, celebrities, and creative professionals from across the entertainment industry. I wore a custom dress designed by a couturier who had dressed Oscar winners, and our reception featured a 7-course dinner prepared by a James Beard Award-winning chef. But the most beautiful part of our wedding was not the luxury or the media attention. It was the moment during our vows when Alexander looked into my eyes and promised to support my dreams with the same passion I brought to supporting his. He told our guests that marrying me was not just about finding love, but about finding a true partner who made him want to become the best version of himself. By our first anniversary, Sterling Design Studio had become one of the most sought-after creative agencies in Los Angeles. We worked with clients ranging from tech startups to established entertainment companies, creating brand identities that told authentic stories and connected with audiences in meaningful ways. I had hired a team of talented designers and strategists, and our work was being recognized with industry awards and features in design publications. 5 years after leaving Portland, I decided it was time to host an event that would celebrate how far I had come, while also giving back to the community that had embraced me. Alexander and I organized a charity gala to benefit arts education programs in underserved Los Angeles schools, an issue that was close to both our hearts. We booked the Beverly Hills Hotel, hired the city's most exclusive catering company, and sent invitations to a carefully curated list of philanthropists, business leaders, and entertainment industry executives. The decision to invite my family was not about revenge, though I would be lying if I said the thought of showing them my success did not bring me satisfaction. Really, it was about closure, about proving to myself that I had moved beyond the pain of their betrayal and built something beautiful from the ashes of my former life. I sent the invitations through a mutual friend, someone who had maintained relationships with both sides of our family drama and could serve as a neutral messenger. I made it clear that the invitation was genuine, that I wanted them to see what I had accomplished, but that I also understood if they preferred not to attend. The gala took place on a warm Saturday evening in May, with golden light streaming through the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows, and the scent of gardenias floating from elaborate floral arrangements. I wore a midnight blue gown that had been custom-made by the same designer who had created my wedding dress, and diamond earrings that Alexander had given me for our 2nd anniversary. As guests arrived, I stood in the receiving line next to my husband, watching familiar faces from our new life mix with philanthropists and celebrities who had become our friends. When I saw my mother Samantha and Marcus walk through the entrance, my heart rate increased, but I felt surprisingly calm. The 5 years had changed all of us, but the differences in how we had evolved were immediately apparent. My mother looked older and smaller than I remembered, wearing a dress that was clearly her best outfit, but seemed modest compared to the designer gowns surrounding her. Samantha was still beautiful, but there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested life had not been as easy as she had expected. Marcus looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, constantly adjusting his bow tie and scanning the room with the wide-eyed expression of someone who was completely out of his element. The moment they realized that this was my event, that I was the hostess they had been reading about in the society pages, their faces went through a series of emotions that would have been comical if they had not been so deeply satisfying. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like panic as they began to understand the magnitude of what they were seeing. But it was when Alexander approached our group, slipping his arm around my waist and greeting me with a kiss that radiated genuine affection, that their faces truly changed. Marcus's mouth actually fell open as he recognized the man who had 2 years earlier turned down his request for venture capital funding for a tech startup that had eventually failed. "Mother Samantha Marcus," I said, my voice steady and warm. "I am so glad you could make it tonight. I would like you to meet my husband, Alexander Sterling." Alexander, who had been briefed on the family history, extended his hand with the gracious confidence of someone who was comfortable in any social situation. "It is wonderful to finally meet Genevieve's family. She has told me so much about growing up in Portland." The conversation that followed was surreal, filled with polite small talk about Los Angeles weather and the beautiful venue, while enormous emotional undercurrents swirled beneath the surface. My mother kept staring at Alexander as if she could not quite believe he was real, while Samantha seemed to be calculating the cost of my dress and jewelry with the practiced eye of someone who had always measured success in material terms. Marcus was the most obviously uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and making awkward comments about how much Los Angeles had grown since his last visit. When Alexander mentioned that he was familiar with Marcus's previous startup attempt, the conversation became even more strained, with Marcus clearly realizing that he was standing in front of the man whose rejection had contributed to one of his most significant professional failures. After the initial shock wore off, my mother requested a private conversation, and we stepped onto the hotel's terrace overlooking the manicured gardens. The party continued inside, but out here it was quiet enough for us to speak honestly for the first time in 5 years. "Genevieve," she began, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology that I should have given you years ago. What I did was wrong, and I have regretted it every day since you left Portland." I looked at this woman who had given me life, and then systematically dismantled my happiness, and I felt something I had not expected: pity. She looked tired and sad, carrying the weight of a decision that had probably haunted her more than she had ever admitted. "I thought I was protecting you," she continued. "I thought Marcus was not good enough for you, that he would hold you back from achieving your potential. But I was wrong about everything. I was wrong about him, wrong about Samantha, and most importantly, wrong about you." "What happened with them?" I asked, though I was not sure I really wanted to know. My mother sighed and looked out over the garden. "They have been struggling for the past 2 years. Marcus lost his job when the startup failed, and he has been having difficulty finding steady work in his field. Samantha is supporting them both with her job at a dental office, and she resents him for not being the successful man she thought she was marrying. They fight constantly about money and about the future they thought they were going to have together." She turned back to me, her eyes filled with tears that looked genuine. "I destroyed their happiness too, Genevieve. I convinced myself that I was being wise and practical, but I was just being controlling and manipulative. I lost my daughter, and I helped create a marriage that is making both of them miserable." Standing there in my beautiful life, surrounded by the evidence of everything I had built from the ruins of their betrayal, I felt the anger that had sustained me for so many years finally begin to dissolve. Not because what they had done was forgivable, but because holding on to that anger was no longer serving any useful purpose. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. "But I need you to understand that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. What you did taught me that I could not depend on anyone else to determine my worth or my future. In some ways, as much as it hurt, you gave me the greatest gift imaginable. You forced me to discover who I really am, when I have no choice but to rely on myself." My mother nodded, accepting the boundary I was establishing. We talked for a few more minutes about safe topics, about my business and her work at the hospital, about the importance of the charity we were supporting that evening. When we returned to the party, she gathered Marcus and Samantha, and they left quietly, understanding that their presence was no longer welcome at my celebration. Later that night, as Alexander and I stood on our bedroom balcony overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The girl who had left Portland in tears, convinced that she was not strong enough, or smart enough, or worthy enough to deserve love, had become a woman who understood that her value was not determined by other people's opinions or choices. "Do you regret anything about how it all happened?" Alexander asked, holding me close as we watched the traffic moving far below on Sunset Boulevard. "I regret the pain," I said honestly. "I regret that people I loved felt justified in betraying me so completely. But I do not regret the outcome. If Marcus had been strong enough to resist my mother's manipulation, if my family had been capable of supporting my happiness instead of undermining it, I might have settled for a comfortable life that was much smaller than what I was truly capable of achieving." The greatest lesson I learned from that entire experience was that sometimes the greatest betrayal leads to the greatest blessing. I discovered that my worth was never determined by who loved me, but by how much I learned to love myself. The family that was supposed to protect me had actually been holding me back from becoming the woman I was meant to be. As I stood there in the life I had built from nothing but determination and hope, I understood that every painful step of my journey had been necessary. The betrayal had forced me to develop strength I never knew I possessed. The loneliness had taught me to value my own company and trust my own judgment. The struggle had prepared me to recognize and appreciate the true partnership Alexander and I had created together. So I want to ask you, have you ever experienced betrayal that felt like the end of the world, but actually turned out to be a new beginning? Have you had to start over completely and discovered strengths you never knew you had? Let me know in the comments below, because I believe that sharing our stories of resilience can help others find the courage to rebuild their own lives. And please hit that like button. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more tales of overcoming life's unexpected challenges, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes our greatest defeats become our most beautiful victories. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to rise above their limitations and create the life you truly deserve.